You think you know scary? You haven't heard anything until you've listened to the Goldfield Hotel staff. Their jobs involve more than just housekeeping. They're navigating an active haunting, from phantom whispers to full-blown apparitions. These are the unedited, terrifying experiences that have haunted them. Get ready to experience the true, unsettling atmosphere of this historic landmark through their very real nightmares. The first time I drove up to the Goldfield Hotel for my interview, I should have turned around. The building rises from the Nevada desert like a monument to something that should have stayed buried. For stories of red brick and white stone, crowned with ornate cornices that cast shadows even in the harsh midday sun. The windows, most of them boarded up now, stare out across the abandoned mining town like hollow eyes. Something about the place made my skin crawl before I even stepped through the front entrance. My name is Rebecca Torres, and I've been the night manager at the Goldfield Hotel for 3 years. 3 years of experiences that have fundamentally changed how I understand reality. 3 years of trying to convince myself that what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've felt in this building has a rational explanation. But I've stopped lying to myself. The Goldfield Hotel is alive with something that defies every logical explanation I've tried to construct. The hotel's history reads like a fever dream of ambition and tragedy. Construction began in 1907 during the height of Goldfield's mining boom, when gold was being pulled from the earth in such quantities that the town swelled to over 20,000 people almost overnight. The hotel was meant to be the crown jewel of Nevada, a testament to the wealth flowing through this desert outpost. They spared no expense. Mahogany staircases, crystal chandeliers imported from Europe, gold leaf decorating the ceiling of the lobby, an elevator system that was revolutionary for its time. The Goldfield Hotel was designed to rival the finest establishments in San Francisco and New York. It opened in 1908, and for a brief, shining moment, it was everything its creators had dreamed. Wealthy mining executives took up residence in suites. High-stakes poker games ran all night in the third-floor card rooms. Elaborate dinners were served in the dining hall beneath those gilt ceilings. But the boom was already ending. By 1910, the mines were producing less. By 1918, many had closed entirely. The hotel limped along for a few more years, but by 1945, it shut its doors for good, or so everyone thought. The building sat empty for decades, slowly deteriorating as the desert tried to reclaim it. Vandals broke in. The wind howled through broken windows. Rain leaked through the roof, staining the once pristine walls. But the hotel never truly died. Workers who came to assess the building for potential restoration reported strange experiences. Footsteps in empty hallways. Voices in rooms that had been abandoned for 40 years. The feeling of being watched by something that didn't want them there. In the early 2000s, a group of investors decided to partially restore the hotel and open it as a historical site and event venue. That's when the real trouble began. Construction workers refused to return after their first shifts. Some quit without explanation. Others told stories that got them laughed out of local bars until the laughter died and people started believing. They spoke of tools that moved on their own, of cold spots that appeared without warning in the middle of summer, of a presence on the fourth floor that felt actively hostile. But the investors pushed forward. They needed staff to run the place once it opened for tours and private events. That's where people like me came in. People who needed work and were willing to overlook the stories. People who convinced themselves that old buildings make strange sounds and that shadows play tricks in poor lighting. People who learned, slowly and terribly, that some stories are true. The hotel's reputation centers on a few specific tragedies. There's Elizabeth, the woman in room 109 who supposedly worked in the hotel during its heyday. The stories say she became pregnant by the hotel's owner, a man named George Wingfield. When he discovered her condition, he chained her to a radiator in room 109 and left her there. The details get murky after that. Some versions say she died in childbirth, alone and terrified. Others claim Wingfield killed her himself. What's consistent across every version is the horror of what happened in that room. Then there's the stabbing that allegedly occurred in room 209 during the hotel's operating years. A confrontation over a gambling debt that turned violent, leaving a man to bleed out on the ornate carpet. They say his stain never fully came out, no matter how many times they tried to clean it. When the restoration crew pulled up the old flooring, they found dark marks soaked deep into the wood beneath. The fourth floor has its own set of stories. That's where the owner's suite was located, and where some of the hotel's darkest business supposedly transpired. Illegal dealings, secret meetings, things that people wanted to keep hidden from the guests staying in the rooms below. Workers doing restoration on that floor reported the strongest feelings of unease. Several refused to go up there alone, even in broad daylight. I learned all of this during my interview with Robert Chun, the hotel's daytime operations manager. He sat across from me in what used to be the hotel's business office, now converted into an administrative space. The room was cold despite the desert heat outside. A single window looked out on a main street, where a handful of buildings still stood alongside the ruins of what had been a thriving town. Robert was matter-of-fact about the hotel's reputation. He didn't dress it up or try to scare me. He simply stated that the building had an unusual atmosphere and that previous employees had reported experiences they couldn't explain. He asked if I believed in ghosts. I remember laughing and saying I believed in old buildings with old pipes and old electrical systems that made strange sounds. He smiled at that, a sad kind of smile that I didn't understand at the time. He needed someone for the night shift. The hotel ran limited tours during the day and occasionally hosted events in the restored portions of the building. But at night, someone needed to be present for security reasons and to handle the building's temperamental systems. The pay was considerably more than I'd make anywhere else in Goldfield, and I needed the money. My mother was sick, and medical bills were crushing me. I couldn't afford to let stories and superstitions stand between me and a paycheck. I took the job. My first night was a Tuesday in October. Robert showed me around during the late afternoon, walking me through the systems I need to monitor. The boiler in the basement that kept the restored sections heated, the security panel by the front desk, the emergency contacts, the areas that were off limits due to structural damage. He gave me a radio and a flashlight and told me to call him if anything seemed wrong. As the sun set behind the distant mountains and shadows crept across the hotel's facade, Robert prepared to leave. He stopped at the front door and turned back to me. The fading light cast his face in sharp relief, making him look older than he had that afternoon. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "if you hear something tonight, if you see something that doesn't make sense, don't try to rationalize it. Just note it and move on. Don't go looking for explanations. Don't investigate. The building has a way of drawing you in if you let it." I nodded, thinking he was being dramatic. This was just an old hotel. Old hotels made sounds. They had drafts and settling foundations and all sorts of mundane explanations for what people interpreted as paranormal activity. I'd read enough about the psychology of fear to know how easily the mind could be tricked. Robert left, and I was alone. The first hour was fine. I sat at the front desk, reading a book and listening to the building settle around me. The radiators clanked as they heated up. Wind whistled through gaps around the boarded windows. Nothing unusual, nothing frightening, just an old building doing what old buildings do. Then, at exactly 9:47 p.m., I heard footsteps on the floor above me. Not the random creaking of floorboards. Not the ambiguous sounds that could be explained away as thermal expansion or wind. Distinct, deliberate footsteps. The sound of someone walking slowly down the second floor hallway directly above the lobby. Heel toe, heel toe, heel toe. Each step clear and purposeful. I froze, my book forgotten in my lap. The walking continued for perhaps 30 seconds, moving from one end of the hallway toward the other. Then it stopped. My heart was hammering. I grabbed my radio and called Robert, but he'd already driven out of range. The emergency number he'd given me went to voicemail. I was on my own. The rational part of my brain supplied explanations. Maybe someone had broken in before I arrived. Maybe a homeless person had found a way into the building and was sheltering there. Maybe it was just the building settling in a pattern that mimicked footsteps. But I knew, even then, that I was lying to myself. The footsteps returned at 11:23 p.m. This time they were on the third floor, and this time they were running. The sound of running footsteps on the third floor shattered whatever composure I'd managed to rebuild. These weren't the slow, deliberate steps from before. This was someone sprinting down the hallway, their feet pounding against the old floorboards with desperate urgency. The sound grew louder, closer, as if whoever was running was heading straight for the staircase that would bring them down to the lobby where I sat frozen behind the desk. Then, silence. Complete and total silence that felt more oppressive than the footsteps had been. The radiators had stopped their clanking. The wind had died. Even my own breathing seemed muffled, as if the air itself had thickened around me. I counted to 60 in my head, then to 60 again, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. I didn't sleep that first night. I stayed at the front desk until Robert arrived at 6 in the morning, my eyes burning with exhaustion and my nerves frayed to their breaking point. When I told him what I'd heard, he simply nodded and said, "The third floor is always active on Tuesday nights." He said it the way someone might comment on the weather. That was 3 years ago. I've learned so much since then about what happens in this building after dark. And I've learned that I'm not alone in my experiences. Every person who works at the Goldfield Hotel has stories. Some are willing to share them. Others keep their experiences locked away, as if speaking about them might make them more real. But eventually, everyone talks. The weight of what we experience here becomes too heavy to carry alone. Jennifer Orozco worked as a cleaner at the Goldfield for 8 months before she quit. I met her during my second week, before I understood what this place truly was. She was in her mid-50s, a grandmother who'd taken the cleaning job to help support her daughter's family. Jennifer was practical and no-nonsense, the kind of woman who didn't waste time on foolishness. That's why what happened to her was so particularly unsettling. Jennifer's job was to clean the restored rooms on the second floor that were occasionally rented out for private events or overnight stays. Most days, she worked alone, moving methodically from room to room with her cart of cleaning supplies. She told me she'd always been comfortable working by herself. She'd find a rhythm, put in her earbuds, and let the work carry her through the day. Room 203 was where things started for her. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, and she was changing the linens on the bed. The room was bright with sunlight streaming through the restored windows. Her music was playing. Everything was completely normal. She just finished tucking in the corners of the fitted sheet when she heard a voice directly behind her say, "That's not how we did it." Jennifer spun around. The room was empty. She pulled out her earbuds, her heart racing, and listened. Nothing. She checked the hallway. No one was there. She even looked in the bathroom and the closet, knowing it was ridiculous but unable to stop herself. The room was completely empty. She convinced herself that she'd somehow heard something from outside, or that her music had played a weird sample she hadn't noticed before. She finished making the bed and moved on to dusting. That's when the lamp on the bedside table turned on by itself. Jennifer watched it happen. She was standing 5 feet away, duster in hand, staring directly at the lamp when the switch physically clicked and light flooded the room. There was no one near it. No electrical surge that might have triggered it. The switch simply moved from off to on, as if an invisible hand had reached out and flipped it. She left the room and didn't go back. She told Robert what happened, and he reassigned her to different rooms. But the experiences followed her. In room 207, she found furniture rearranged between her morning and afternoon cleaning rounds, even though no one had been in the room. The desk that had been against the north wall was now against the south wall. The chairs that had been positioned by the window were now facing the door. It would have taken considerable effort to move that heavy furniture, yet it had happened in the 3 hours between her visits. In room 211, she experienced something that finally broke her. She was vacuuming, the noise of the machine loud in the small space, when she felt someone grab her shoulder. Not a gentle touch or a brush of something that might have been explained away. A firm, deliberate grip that squeezed hard enough to hurt. She screamed and whirled around, yanking the vacuum's plug from the wall in her panic. No one was there, but when she looked down at her shoulder, she could see 5 distinct red marks forming on her skin through her shirt, as if fingers had pressed in her flesh. She ran from the room, from the building, and called Robert from her car. She gave her 2 weeks' notice that afternoon and stopped coming in after just 3 days. The last time I saw her, those finger marks had faded to faint bruises, but the fear in her eyes hadn't diminished at all. Then there's David Nakamura, the security guard who works the weekend night shifts. David is a former military police officer, trained to stay calm under pressure and to rely on observable facts rather than assumptions. He approaches his work at the Goldfield with professional detachment, monitoring the security cameras and conducting regular perimeter checks. Or, at least, he tries to maintain that attachment. The hotel's security system consists of 8 cameras positioned throughout the building. For cover the exterior, watching the parking area and the main entrances. For inside, monitoring the lobby, the second-floor hallway, the third-floor hallway, and the basement access. David sits in a small security office off the lobby, watching these feeds on a bank of monitors. The cameras malfunction regularly. That's the official explanation. Static interference, David calls it in his reports. Digital artifacts caused by the age of the system and the building's old wiring. But David has told me what he really sees on those screens during the long hours between midnight and dawn. Shadows that move against the direction of any possible light source. Dark shapes that cross the hallways on the second and third floors. Clearly visible on camera, but nowhere to be found when David goes to investigate. Figures that appear in the basement footage, standing motionless in the corner for hours before vanishing between one frame and the next. The worst incident occurred on a Saturday night in January. David was conducting his standard 2 a.m. perimeter check, walking through the restore portions of the building with his flashlight and checking that all doors and windows were secure. He just finished the second floor and was heading down the main staircase when the security alarm for the 4th floor began blaring. The 4th floor is completely off limits. The restoration workup there was never completed due to budget constraints and the workers' refusal to continue. The door at the base of the 4th floor staircase is kept locked, and the alarm is supposed to trigger if anyone opens it. David radioed to the security office, forgetting for a moment that he was alone in the building, then ran back up the stairs. The 4th floor door was still closed and locked. The alarm was screaming. David checked the security panel and saw that the door sensor registered as open, even though he was standing there looking at the closed door. He radioed Robert, who was 15 minutes away. They agreed David should reset the alarm and wait for Robert to arrive before investigating further. David turned off the alarm. In the sudden silence, he heard footsteps coming down the staircase on the other side of the locked door. Not hurried steps. Slow, measured, deliberate. Someone was walking down the 4th floor stairs toward where David stood. He could hear each footfall clearly, getting closer and closer. The steps stopped directly on the other side of the door. David stood there in the dim emergency lighting, staring at that door, knowing that something was standing just on the other side. The door handle began to turn, slowly at first, then faster, rattling as whatever was on the other side tried to open the locked door. David backed away, his hand on his service weapon, even though he knew bullets wouldn't stop whatever was trying to get through that door. The handle rattled for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then it stopped. The footsteps retreated back up the stairs, fading into silence. When Robert arrived and they opened the door together, the 4th floor staircase was empty. There were no footprints in the dust that coated every surface. No signs that anyone or anything had been there. But David knows what he heard. He knows something tried to open that door. He still works at the Goldfield, but he never conducts perimeter checks alone anymore, and he refuses to go near the fourth-floor access after midnight. The front desk staff have their own collection of encounters. Melissa Huang works the afternoon and evening shifts, usually leaving around 9 p.m. when I arrive. She's told me about the phantom guests who appear in the lobby during the slow hours between lunch and dinner. She'll look up from her computer and see someone standing by the old fireplace or examining the photographs of the hotel's glory days that hang on the walls. She'll start to greet them, to ask if they need help, and they'll vanish. Simply cease to exist between one blink and the next. These aren't shadowy figures or vague shapes that might be tricks of light. Melissa describes them in detail. An elderly woman in a high-collared dress from the early 1900s, her hair pinned up in an elaborate style. A man in a dark suit with a pocket watch chain, his face obscured by shadow. A young girl in a white nightgown who appears near the staircase, always looking up toward the higher floors. The most unsettling guest is a man who appears behind the front desk itself. Melissa will feel someone standing next to her, close enough to touch, and when she turns, she'll see him for just a second. He's tall and gaunt, wearing what looks like a hotel uniform from the 1920s or 1930s. His eyes are wrong somehow. Too dark, too hollow. He never speaks, never moves. He just stares at her with those terrible eyes until he fades away. Melissa has also dealt with the phantom phone calls. The hotel's old landline system rings regularly, the ancient phones letting out their shrill bell even though the lines haven't been connected to any outside service for years. When Melissa answers, sometimes she hears only static. Other times, she hears voices, conversations that seem to be happening far away, as if she's overhearing calls placed decades ago. People discussing room rates from 1915. A woman asking if a particular guest is still registered. A man's voice, tight with anger, demanding to speak to the manager about a situation in room 109. Once, Melissa heard breathing on the other end of the line. Just breathing, steady and slow, for over a minute before the line went dead. She tried to convince herself it was just some quirk of the old wiring, phantom signals bouncing through disconnected lines. But the breathing had sounded so deliberate, so aware, as if whoever was on the other end knew exactly who they were calling and was waiting for something. Thomas Rodriguez, who works maintenance, encountered something in a hotel's vast basement that he still can't fully process. The basement is a maze of old storage rooms, the boiler room, laundry facilities that haven't been used since the 1940s, and corridors that seem to lead nowhere. Thomas's job is to maintain the heating system and handle any plumbing or electrical issues that arise in the restored portions of the building. He was working on a problem with the boiler one afternoon in November. The temperature in the second-floor rooms had dropped suddenly, and he needed to check the heating system. The basement was its usual self, dimly lit by scattered bulbs, smelling of old stone and rust, and something else that Thomas could never quite identify. He was adjusting valves and checking pressure gauges when he heard humming coming from deeper in the basement. It was a woman's voice, humming a melody that sounded old-fashioned, from an era when people gathered around pianos in parlors. Thomas followed the sound, thinking perhaps one of the cleaning staff had come down for supplies. The humming led him past the laundry room, past the old storage areas, to a section of the basement he'd never explored. The humming stopped when he reached a heavy wooden door that stood slightly ajar. Thomas pushed the door open. The room beyond was small and empty except for an old radiator against the far wall. The air was frigid despite the working boiler, just 50 feet away. And there, etched into the concrete floor in what looked like dry blood, were words, "She's still here." Thomas backed out of the room and hasn't returned to that section of the basement. He now handles all maintenance tasks during daylight hours and refuses any assignments that would require him to work in the basement alone. He's asked Robert repeatedly what that room was used for, but the hotel's historical records don't show the particular space on any floor plans. Officially, according to the building's blueprints, that room doesn't exist. These are just a few of the experiences reported by the Goldfield Hotel staff. There are dozens more, hundreds, if you count the smaller incidents. The sudden cold spots that appear and disappear without warning. The feeling of being watched that becomes so oppressive some workers have panic attacks. The sounds of music from empty ballrooms. The smell of perfume or cigar smoke in rooms where no one has been for decades. The objects that move when no one is looking. The whispered words that seem to come from just behind your ear. Every person who works here has experienced something they can't explain. Some quit immediately. Others, like me, stay for reasons we can't fully articulate. The money is part of it, certainly, but there's something else. A fascination, perhaps. Or maybe it's the fear that leaving won't actually help, that once the Goldfield Hotel has marked you with its attention, you carry that with you wherever you go. I've collected these accounts over my 3 years here, listening to my coworkers share their stories during brief, overlapping shifts or in hushed conversations in the parking lot before we head home. We don't talk about these things inside the building anymore. It feels dangerous somehow, as if speaking about the hotel's inhabitants might draw their attention. But the stories need to be told, because what's happening at the Goldfield Hotel isn't just folklore or urban legend or the overactive imaginations of stressed workers. It's real, it's documented, it's ongoing, and it's getting worse. The longer you work at the Goldfield Hotel, the more you understand that what happens here goes far beyond disembodied voices and mysterious footsteps. Those are just the surface manifestations, the experiences that are easiest to discuss and rationalize. Beneath that surface lies something far more disturbing. The personal encounters that leave permanent marks, both physical and psychological. The moments when the boundary between our world and whatever exists in this building becomes so thin you can feel it tearing. Thomas Rodriguez, our maintenance worker, eventually shared the full story of what happened to him in the boiler room. The incident with the mysterious room and the words on the floor was disturbing, certainly, but it wasn't what made him refuse to work in the basement alone. That decision came after what happened 3 weeks later, on a cold December afternoon, when the boiler started making concerning sounds that couldn't be ignored. Thomas went down with his toolbox just after 2 p.m., when the winter sunlight was strongest. He learned that timing mattered in the Goldfield. Certain areas were more oppressive during specific hours. The basement was always unsettling, but between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, it felt almost manageable. The boiler room was a cavernous space with a ceiling that stretched up toward the first floor, pipes running like veins along the walls, and the massive old boiler itself squatting in the center like some industrial heart. The sound turned out to be a loose valve, an easy fix that would take maybe 20 minutes. Thomas got to work, his focus on the task at hand, trying not to think about the shadows that seemed too dark in the corners or the way the temperature fluctuated wildly despite the working heater. He was tightening the last bolt when he felt it, breath on the back of his neck. Not air movement from the heating system, not a draft from some gap in the foundation. Breath, warm and moist, and carrying the faint smell of decay. Someone was standing directly behind him, close enough that Thomas could feel their presence like a physical weight. Close enough that when they exhaled, it stirred his hair. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but Thomas made himself turn around slowly. He needed to see. He needed to know. When he completed the turn, there was no one there. The boiler room was empty except for him, but the feeling of being watched intensified to an almost unbearable degree. And then he felt it again, a hand pressed against his lower back, firm and cold even through his work shirt. Thomas lurched forward, spinning to face whatever had touched him. Still nothing visible, but the hand returned, this time on his shoulder, gripping with enough pressure that his shirt bunched under invisible fingers. Thomas shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls, and the grip released. He grabbed his toolbox and ran for the stairs, the feeling of pursuit so strong he could almost hear footsteps behind him. When he reached the first floor, gasping and shaking, he pulled off his shirt to check his shoulder. There were marks, for elongated bruises where fingers had dug into his flesh, and a thumbprint on his collarbone. The marks stayed for over a week, fading from deep purple to yellow-green before finally disappearing. Thomas still has a photograph of them on his phone. He's shown it to me. The fingerprints are clearly visible, impossibly large, as if whatever grabbed him had hands much bigger than any human should be. The physical contact seems to be escalating throughout the hotel. We've all noticed it over the past year. The phenomena used to be primarily auditory and visual. Now, increasingly, staff members report being touched, grabbed, even pushed by unseen forces. We're no longer simply witnesses to whatever haunts this building. We're becoming participants, whether we want to be or not. Carmen Silva, who works as a cook in the hotel's small kitchen, experienced something that challenged everything she thought she understood about the supernatural. Carmen has worked in restaurants her entire adult life. She's comfortable in kitchens, confident in that environment in a way she isn't anywhere else. The Goldfield's kitchen is small but functional, recently updated to allow for catering services during private events. It's one of the most modern spaces in the entire building, with new appliances and bright LED lighting. It should have felt safe. Carmen was prepping vegetables for an evening event on a Thursday afternoon in March. She had music playing from her phone, a podcast she enjoyed about true crime stories. The kitchen was warm from the ovens, filled with the smell of roasting chicken. Everything was completely normal. She was chopping onions when the temperature dropped so suddenly and so dramatically that she could see her breath. The entire room had gone frigid in the span of perhaps 5 seconds. Carmen looked up from her cutting board, confused, wondering if the heating system had failed. That's when she saw the frost forming on the stainless steel prep table across from her. Ice crystals spread across the metal surface like someone was painting them there with an invisible brush. Within 30 seconds, a 1/4 inch of frost covered the table, the counters, the refrigerator doors. Carmen stood frozen, knife in hand, watching as her warm kitchen transformed into something that belonged in a walk-in freezer. The lights flickered. Her phone died mid-sentence, the podcast cutting off with an electronic squeal, and then the utensils started falling. Not all at once, one at a time, deliberately, as if someone was walking along the magnetic strip where the knives hung and pulling each one off individually. A paring knife clattered to the floor. 3 seconds later, a chef's knife, then a meat cleaver. Carmen watched each one fall, heard each one hit the tile with a metallic ring that seemed too loud in the frozen silence. She wanted to run, but she couldn't make her legs move. The cold was so intense it hurt to breathe. Her fingers were going numb where she gripped the knife. And then she heard it, humming. The same melody Thomas had heard in the basement, old-fashioned and mournful. The sound came from the walk-in cooler behind her. Carmen forced herself to turn. The cooler door was opening slowly, frost billowing out into the kitchen. Through the mist, she could see a shape forming. Not a shadow, not a vague outline. A woman, becoming more solid with each second, her features emerging from the cold air like a photograph developing. She wore an old-fashioned dress with a high collar. Her hair was dark and pinned up, and her eyes, when they focused on Carmen, were completely black. The woman took a step out of the cooler. Carmen found her voice and screamed. She ran from the kitchen, abandoning her prep work, her phone, everything. She didn't stop running until she was outside the building, gasping in the afternoon heat, her arms wrapped around herself as she shivered violently from the cold that seemed to have seeped into her bones. When Robert went to investigate 20 minutes later, the kitchen was normal temperature. There was no frost, no ice. The utensils that had fallen were back on their magnetic strip, hanging in perfect alignment. Carmen's phone worked fine. The only evidence that anything unusual had happened was the onion she'd been chopping, which had frozen solid and shattered when Robert tried to pick it up. Carmen took 3 days off after that. When she came back, she refused to work alone in the kitchen. She also installed a small camera on the counter, angled to capture the entire room. She's caught some interesting footage over the months since then. Shadows that cross the kitchen when she's the only one there. The oven door opening by itself. Once, the faucet turned on full blast while she was 20 feet away, water spraying everywhere until she ran over to shut it off. But the most disturbing footage is from a night 2 weeks ago. Carmen had stayed late to clean up after an event. It was nearly midnight, and she was washing the last of the pots when the camera captured something moving behind her. A dark shape, vaguely human in form, standing just at the edge of the frame. Carmen didn't see it at the time. She only discovered it when reviewing the footage the next day. The shape stands there for almost 3 minutes, completely still, watching her work. Then it moves closer, gliding rather than walking, until it's directly behind Carmen. It reaches out, its hand hovering inches from the back of her head, before the footage cuts out with a burst of static. Carmen hasn't watched that video again. She's backed it up to cloud storage and refuses to delete it, but she won't play it. She says knowing that thing was standing behind her, close enough to touch her, while she was completely unaware, is worse than any direct encounter could be. The psychological toll of working at a Goldfield is immense. We all carry it differently, but we all carry it. Jennifer Orozco developed severe anxiety and started having nightmares about being trapped in room 211 with the thing that grabbed her shoulder. David Nakamura has become hypervigilant, jumping at shadows even in his own home. Melissa Huang confessed to me that she sees the gaunt man from behind the desk in her peripheral vision sometimes when she's at home, standing in her hallway, or by her bedroom door. I've had my own struggles. I've developed insomnia that no medication seems to touch. When I do sleep, I dream about the hotel. Long corridors that seem to stretch forever. Rooms with doors that open onto brick walls. Staircases that spiral down into darkness. And always, the feeling of being chased by something I can't see, but can hear breathing behind me. There's also the guilt. The knowledge that we're all part of a system that brings people into this building despite knowing what it is. Every tour group that comes through during the day. Every private event we host. Every overnight guest who stays in one of the restored rooms because they want to experience something paranormal. We smile and take their money and never tell them about the bruises on Thomas's shoulder or the video from Carmen's kitchen or what David heard on the other side of that fourth floor door. We tell ourselves they know what they're signing up for. The hotel's reputation is well established. People come here specifically because it's haunted. They want to experience something supernatural. But there's a difference between wanting to feel a cold spot or hear a mysterious sound and actually encountering whatever it is that lives in this building. Most visitors get a few ambiguous experiences they can interpret however they choose. They leave excited, convinced they've glimpsed the paranormal, unaware of how lucky that's all they got. But sometimes, something happens to a guest. Not often, but often enough that we all know about it. Robert keeps the incident reports in a locked file cabinet in his office. I've seen some of them. A woman who spent one night in room 209 and checked out at 3 a.m., trembling and incoherent, refusing to explain what she'd experienced. A man on a day tour who collapsed on the 3rd floor, hyperventilating and crying, claiming something had followed him from room to room, whispering terrible things he wouldn't repeat. A teenage girl who had to be taken to the emergency room after a tour because she'd gone catatonic, staring at nothing, unresponsive to any stimulation for over an hour. The hotel has affected all of us, changed us in ways that go deeper than simple fear. Working here means accepting that reality is more complicated and more frightening than most people can comprehend. It means living with the knowledge that consciousness doesn't always end at death, that some part of people can linger in the places where they suffered. It means understanding that the physical world we inhabit shares space with something else, something we can't fully perceive, but that perceives us all too well. Thomas told me once that he doesn't recognize himself anymore. He used to be skeptical, rational, the kind of person who needed empirical evidence before accepting anything as true. Now he knows there are experiences that can't be rationalized away, encounters that fundamentally alter your understanding of what's possible. He says the worst part isn't the fear, it's the helplessness. The understanding that you're sharing space with entities that don't follow any rules you comprehend, that can touch you and hurt you, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. Carmen has started attending church again after 20 years away. She lights candles and prays for protection, even though she's not sure who or what she's praying to anymore. Melissa carries sage and crystals, protection charms from a dozen different traditions, anything that might help shield her from the attention of the hotel's residents. David has considered quitting more times than he can count, but something keeps him coming back. He says it's the money, but I think it's something else. Once you've been marked by the Goldfield, once it's shown you what it truly is, leaving doesn't feel possible. The hotel has gotten inside all of us. We carry it with us now, wherever we go. I know I do. Even on my nights off, even at home in my small apartment miles from Goldfield, I feel the hotel's presence. I'll be watching television and suddenly feel that familiar cold breath on my neck. I'll be cooking dinner and hear footsteps in my empty hallway. I'll lie in bed, try to sleep, and know, absolutely know, that something is standing in my darkened doorway, watching me. The hotel follow me home. Or maybe I brought something back with me without realizing it. Either way, I'm never truly alone anymore. None of us are. After 3 years of collecting accounts from the Goldfield hotel staff, certain patterns have emerged from the chaos. What seemed like random paranormal activity reveals itself to be something more structured, more intentional. The hotel isn't simply haunted by confused spirits wandering its halls. Something far more complex is happening within these walls. And the longer we work here, the more we begin to understand the terrible logic behind it. The most obvious pattern is temporal. Specific phenomena occur at specific times with remarkable consistency. The footsteps I heard on my first night, the ones that crossed the second floor at 9:47 p.m., happen every Tuesday. David has verified this over months of security footage. Every Tuesday night, without fail, at exactly 9:47 p.m., the motion-sensitive cameras on the second floor register movement. The same path, the same pace, the same duration. Something walks the hallway every week, following a routine it established decades ago. The running footsteps on the third floor appear on Tuesday nights as well, always between 11:15 and 11:30 p.m. We've theorized that the two phenomena might be connected, that perhaps what walks the second floor ascends to the third floor, or something causes it to run. But we have no way to verify this. The few times staff members have positioned themselves to observe have resulted in nothing visible, only the sounds echoing through empty hallways and the cameras registering movement where nothing can be seen. Thursday nights bring different activity. That's when the phantom phone calls are most frequent. When Melissa hears those disconnected voices discussing room rates and guest registrations from a century ago. The calls come in clusters, usually between 7 and 9 p.m., the old phones ringing in a cascade throughout the building. Front desk, the business office, even phones in some of the guest rooms all ringing simultaneously, all connecting to conversations from the past. I've listened to some of these calls. Robert recorded a few months of them before it became too disturbing to continue. The voices are clear, undistorted by static or distance. People discussing completely mundane things with the casual ease of everyday conversation. A woman booking a room for her husband who'll be arriving from San Francisco on the afternoon train. A man asking about the restaurant's dinner hours. Two people coordinating a business meeting in one of the conference rooms. What makes these recordings so unsettling isn't the content, it's the dates. When people mention specific days or reference current events, they're talking about things that happened between 1908 and 1920. We're listening to actual phone conversations from the hotel's early years, somehow preserved in the building itself and replaying on a loop that we don't fully understand. Weekend nights, particularly Saturday nights, are when the fourth floor becomes active. That's when David hears the footsteps coming down the stairs, when the door handle rattles, when something tries to access the lower floors. We've started referring to it as the Saturday presence because none of us want to give it a more specific name. Naming something makes it more real, more permanent. As long as it remains the Saturday presence, we can maintain some psychological distance from what it might actually be. But the most significant pattern is geographical. Certain rooms and areas of the hotel are consistently more active than others, and that activity seems to be associated with specific entities. We've started to identify the hotel's permanent residents, the consciousnesses or presences that haven't moved on and probably never will. Room 109 is the most infamous, Elizabeth's room. The accounts of what happened there have become local legend. The pregnant woman chained to the radiator, left to die alone. Whether every detail is true doesn't matter anymore. Something terrible happened in that room, and the psychic residue remains. The room is kept locked now, not open for tours or rentals, but staff still have to enter occasionally for maintenance or inspection. No one enters room 109 alone. That's an unofficial but strictly enforced rule among the staff. Thomas absolutely refuses to do any maintenance work in there by himself. Not after what he experienced last April. He was replacing a broken window pane, working quickly to minimize his time and space. The room was cold despite the working radiator, and it smelled wrong. Not like rot or decay, but like fear. If fear has a scent, room 109 reeks of it. Thomas was fitting the new glass into the frame when he heard chains rattling. The sound came from the corner where the radiator stood, the same radiator that allegedly served as Elizabeth's prison. The rattling grew louder, more frantic, accompanied by a sound that Thomas described as whimpering. A woman's voice, crying in pain and terror, begging someone to help her. Thomas dropped his tools and backed toward the door, his eyes fixed on that corner. The air above the radiator was shimmering, distorting like heat waves on asphalt. And then, for just a moment, he saw her. A woman in a white nightgown, her wrists rubbed raw and bloody, her face contorted in agony. She reached toward him, her mouth open in a silent scream, and Thomas ran. He refuses to talk about the details of her appearance, but he did say one thing that stayed with me. She wasn't asking for help. She was warning me, telling me to get out before whatever did that or noticed I was there. Elizabeth isn't the only presence in room 109. There's something else there, something that feels predatory. Multiple staff members have reported an overwhelming sense of malevolence in that room, a feeling of being watched by something that enjoys suffering. Carmen, who's only been in room 109 once to help move furniture, said it felt like standing next to an open wound in reality. Like the room itself was damaged beyond repair, and that damage had attracted things that feed on pain. Room 209, where the alleged stabbing occurred, has a different energy. It's not malevolent so much as confused and angry. The presence there seems to be caught in a loop, reenacting whatever violence transpired. David's security footage has captured strange lights in room 209 on multiple occasions. Flashes that look like they could be from an old-fashioned camera, or perhaps reflections from metal, like a knife blade catching light. Guests who stayed in room 209 report disturbing dreams about confrontations and arguments. One man woke at 3 a.m. to find his room in disarray, furniture overturned, despite having gone to sleep in a tidy space. He reported hearing shouting, the sound of struggle, and when he turned on the lights, He found a dark stain on the carpet near the bed that hadn't been visible when he checked in. The stain was gone by morning, but photographs he took with his phone showed it clearly, a large, irregular mark that could have been a bloodstain. The third floor has its own resident, something we've come to think of as the runner. This entity seems to be stuck in a perpetual state of flight, racing down the hallway in terror or urgency. The few people who've reported seeing it describe a dark figure, human-shaped but somehow wrong in its proportions, moving with inhuman speed. It appears and disappears without warning, and it never stops running. Melissa encountered the runner during one of her rare evening shifts that extended past her normal hours. She was walking down the third-floor hallway to check a room when she heard the footsteps coming toward her. She pressed herself against the wall, having learned by then not to stand in the middle of hallways when phenomena were manifesting. The footsteps grew deafeningly loud, as if whatever was running was coming at full speed directly at her position. She saw it for perhaps 2 seconds as it passed. A figure dressed in dark clothing from an earlier era, its features blurred by speed or by something else, moving so fast it left after images in the air. It passed within inches of her, and Melissa felt a blast of cold air and smelled something acrid, like burning electrical wiring. Then it was gone, the footsteps fading into silence. Melissa says what disturbed her most wasn't the figure itself. It was the feeling that accompanied it. Pure, distilled terror. Whatever the runner is, whatever it's fleeing from, it's been running for over a century and still hasn't escaped. That kind of endless fear leaves marks on reality itself. The basement, particularly that room Thomas found with the words scratched into the floor, seems to be connected to something older than the hotel itself. The building was constructed on land that had its own dark history before the first brick was ever laid. The Goldfield mining boom attracted desperate people from all over the country, and desperation breeds violence. There are stories of claim jumpers killed and buried in unmarked graves, of workers who disappeared into the mines and were never seen again, of things done in the pursuit of gold that no one wanted to talk about even at the time. The hotel's basement may have been built over one of these forgotten sites. Thomas isn't the only one who's heard humming down there. Jennifer reported it during her brief time working at the hotel. So has Robert, though he rarely talks about his own experiences. The humming always comes from the deeper sections of the basement, from areas that aren't on the official floor plans. It's always a woman's voice, always that same old-fashioned melody that sounds like it comes from a music box or a lullaby from over a century ago. But there's something else in the basement, something that doesn't hum or speak or make any sound at all. David discovered it during one of his rare daytime investigations of the lower levels. He was checking the security camera in the basement access area when he noticed something odd about the footage from the previous night. There was a shadow on the recording that didn't correspond to any physical object. It was human-shaped, standing motionless in the corridor for over 3 hours, from 2:17 a.m. until 5:43 a.m. David went down to check the area, thinking maybe there was some structural element casting an unusual shadow. But when he reached the spot where the shadow had appeared on camera, he found something scratched into the concrete wall. Words in the same script as the message Thomas had found in that locked room. "Don't look for us. We're already watching you." The message hadn't been there before. David had walked past that section of wall dozens of times. The scratches were fresh, the concrete dust still clinging to the letters. Someone or something had carved that warning into solid concrete recently. Without making any sound that the security system picked up, these entities, these presences, seem to have territories within the hotel. They don't wander freely, but instead remain tied to specific locations. Elizabeth stays in room 109. The stabbing victim haunts room 209. The runner is bound to the third floor. The humming woman belongs to the basement. And the Saturday presence remains on the fourth floor, trying to descend, but unable to fully break through whatever barrier keeps it trapped up there. We've theorized extensively about why these patterns exist. Carmen believes the hotel itself is some kind of prison, that the building traps the consciousness of people who died within its walls. Thomas thinks the entities are more like recordings, psychic impressions left behind by traumatic events that replay endlessly without true consciousness behind them. Melissa has suggested that maybe they're from somewhere else entirely, beings that can access our world through weak points in reality, and the Goldfield Hotel has multiple such weak points. I have my own theory, one I haven't shared with anyone, because it's too disturbing even for people who work in a haunted hotel. I think the entities are aware. I think they know we're here. And I think they're trying to communicate something we're not equipped to understand. The evidence for this comes from small interactions that build over time. The way Jennifer's cleaning supplies were arranged into patterns when she returned to rooms. The way the phantom phone calls sometimes seem to be trying to reach us, not just replaying conversations from the past. The message carved into the basement wall. We're already watching you. That's not a random phenomenon or a psychic recording. That's deliberate communication. Something in the basement knows we're investigating it, knows we're documenting what happens here, and wanted us to know that it's aware of our presence. The same is true of what happened to Carmen in the kitchen. The woman who emerged from the freezer didn't just appear randomly. She walked toward Carmen specifically. She made eye contact. That was an intentional interaction, an attempt at contact, or perhaps a warning. And what Thomas saw in room 109, Elizabeth reaching toward him while warning him to leave, that suggests consciousness and concern. If these were just traumatic imprints replaying endlessly, they wouldn't be able to perceive us or modify their behavior based on our presence. But they do perceive us. They react to us. They're trying to tell us something. Last month, we had a staff meeting to discuss the increasing activity. Robert, who usually maintains a professional distance from the paranormal aspects of the hotel, seemed genuinely concerned. He'd been compiling reports of incidents over the past 5 years, and the data showed a clear escalation. More frequent encounters, more intense manifestations, more physical contact. The phenomena were getting stronger. During the meeting, we tried to identify any common factors that might explain the increase. Had there been construction or renovation work that might have disturbed something? No. Had there been any significant changes to how we operate the hotel? Not really. Had anyone brought in occult objects or conducted seances? Absolutely not. That's strictly forbidden by hotel policy. We couldn't find any external cause for the escalation, which left us with an uncomfortable conclusion. The entities themselves are becoming more active by choice. Whatever consciousness resides in the Goldfield Hotel has decided to increase its interaction with the living world. We don't know why. We don't know what it wants. But we can't ignore the pattern. David raised a question during that meeting that haunts me. What if they're not trying to scare us away? What if they're trying to warn us about something worse? That possibility hadn't occurred to most of us. We'd assumed the entities were territorial, that they wanted us gone because we were intruding on their space. But what if David was right? What if the increasing activity, the escalating encounters, the direct communication attempts were all warnings? What if Elizabeth reaching out to Thomas was genuinely trying to protect him from something else in that room? What if the basement entity carved that message not as a threat, but as advice? If that's true, then we have to ask, what are they warning us about? What could be worse than everything we've already experienced? What exists in this hotel that even its permanent residents fear? The 4th floor. That's what we keep coming back to. The Saturday presence that tries to descend. The workers during renovation who refuse to continue. The feeling of malevolence that everyone reports from up there. Whatever is on the 4th floor is different from the other entities. It's stronger, more hostile, and it wants out. Robert finally admitted during the meeting that he's been having nightmares about the 4th floor. In his dreams, the door at the base of the stairs is open. Something is coming down, step by step, moving toward the lower floors where staff and guests are unaware of what's descending. He always wakes before it reaches the bottom, but the dreams are getting longer. Each time, the thing on the stairs makes it a little further before he wakes. Melissa confessed she's been having similar dreams. So has Thomas. So have I. We're all dreaming about the fourth floor, about something coming down those stairs, about a door that won't stay locked. The dreams are too consistent to be coincidence. Something is reaching into our sleeping minds, planting images, preparing us for something that hasn't happened yet, but will. 3 nights ago, David's security camera captured footage that we've watched dozens of times, trying to understand what it means. The camera that monitors the fourth floor access door recorded something at 3:33 a.m. The door is visible in the frame, closed and locked as always. But the shadows around it began to move, swirling like smoke, growing darker and more dense until they completely obscured the door. For 3 minutes and 17 seconds, the camera showed nothing but writhing darkness where the door should be. Then the shadows dispersed as suddenly as they'd formed, and the door was visible again. But now it was slightly ajar, not open, but no longer fully closed. The lock was still engaged, the deadbolt still in place, but a gap of perhaps 2 inches showed between the door and the frame. David went to check immediately, even though every instinct told him to stay away. When he reached the fourth floor access, the door was closed and locked, just as it should be. But when he looked closely, he could see fresh scratches around the lock mechanism, as if something had been trying to force it open from the other side. We're running out of rational explanations. We're running out of ways to pretend that what's happening here is manageable or understandable. The Goldfield Hotel is waking up. Its residents are becoming more active, more desperate to communicate. And something on the fourth floor is getting closer to breaking through the barrier that's contained it for decades. The question we're all asking now, the question none of us want to answer, is simple. What happens when it finally gets out? The incident that changed everything happened on a Saturday night in late September, exactly 1 week ago. I'm writing this now because I need to document what occurred while the memories are still fresh, before I start trying to convince myself it didn't happen the way I remember. Before the human mind's desperate need to rationalize and minimize kicks in and rewrites the truth into something more palatable. David was working his regular weekend night shift. I'd stop by around 11 p.m. to drop off some paperwork for Robert and to check on things. I'd learned over 3 years to trust my instincts about the hotel, and that night something felt wrong before I even entered the building. The air was too still. The usual ambient sounds of the desert night seemed muffled, as if the world was holding its breath. David was in the security office, monitoring the cameras with an intensity that went beyond his usual vigilance. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, and when I asked if he was okay, he just gestured at the monitors. Fourth floor camera's been acting up all night. Static and interference. And listen. I listened. At first, I didn't hear anything unusual, just the normal sounds of the old building settling. Then I caught it, a rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere above us. Not random, not the building settling. Deliberate. Something pounding against the surface with steady, measured beats. How long has that been going on? I asked, though I already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Started at 9:47, David said. Same time as the Tuesday footsteps. Except it's Saturday, and it's coming from the fourth floor. The patterns were breaking down. The temporal boundaries that had seemed so reliable were dissolving. Whatever had been contained by those patterns was no longer following the rules. The pounding continued for another 20 minutes, then stopped abruptly at 11:37 p.m. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise had been. David and I sat in the security office, both of us watching the monitors, neither of us willing to voice what we were thinking. At 11:42 p.m., the fourth floor camera went completely black. Not static, not interference, just solid black, as if someone had covered the lens. David tried cycling through the feeds, checking connections, but the camera remained dead. He picked up his radio to call Robert, then hesitated. What would he say? But the camera went out, and there was pounding from the fourth floor. Robert would tell him to check it in the morning, that it could wait until daylight. But it couldn't wait. We both knew it. "I'll go up with you," I heard myself say, surprising both of us. David looked at me, evaluating, then nodded. Neither of us should have gone. We should have left the building, called Robert, waited for daylight and back up. But the hotel had been building to something for months, maybe years. Whatever was going to happen was happening now, and some part of me needed to witness it. We took 2 flashlights, our phones, and David's radio. The walk from the security office to the fourth floor access felt longer than it should have. The hotel was never truly quiet, but that night it was silent in a way that felt unnatural. No creaking pipes, no settling floorboards. Even our footsteps seemed dampened, as if the building was absorbing sound. When we reached the fourth floor access door, we both stopped. The door was open, not slightly ajar like in the camera footage from 3 nights earlier. Fully open, the staircase beyond visible in the dim emergency lighting. "I locked this myself at 6 p.m., David said quietly. "I check it 3 times every shift." It was locked. The scratches around the lock mechanism that David had noticed before were deeper now, more extensive. Something had been working at that lock systematically, and it had finally succeeded. The door stood open like a mouth, the darkness beyond seeming to breathe. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to run. But I've learned over 3 years of the Goldfield that running doesn't help. The hotel finds you wherever you go. It gets inside your head, your dreams, your waking thoughts. If something was happening on the fourth floor, I needed to understand what it was. Understanding felt like the only weapon I had. David went first, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I followed close behind, my own light sweeping the stairs ahead of us. The staircase was narrow, enclosed by walls on both sides, the air thick with dust and something else I couldn't identify. The temperature dropped with each step we climbed. By the time we reached the landing, I could see my breath misting in front of my face. The fourth floor was worse than I'd imagined. The restoration work had barely started up here before the workers refused to continue. Broken plaster littered the hallway floor. Wallpaper hung in tattered strips. The ceiling had collapsed in several places, exposing the building's skeleton of wooden beams and ancient wiring. Our flashlights created jumping shadows that made it difficult to distinguish between real movement and tricks of light. But we both saw it immediately. A trail of footprints in the dust, leading from the staircase down the hallway toward what would have been the owner's suite. The prints were fresh, the dust disturbed recently. They were too large to be human footprints, elongated and oddly shaped, as if whatever made them didn't quite fit the proportions of a normal foot. We followed the prints. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe compulsion. Maybe the hotel itself was guiding us, making sure we saw what it wanted us to see. The footprints led to a door at the end of the hallway, a door that stood open onto darkness that our flashlights couldn't fully penetrate. David stopped at the threshold. "Rebecca, this is where I saw my security feed go black. Whatever covered that camera is in this room." I knew he was right. I also knew we were going to enter anyway. We'd come this far. The hotel had been building to this moment for 3 years, maybe longer. Whatever waited in that room was the answer to questions we've been asking since we started working here. The owner's suite was massive, taking up the entire end of the fourth floor. Our flashlights revealed remnants of former grandeur. An ornate fireplace, crown molding, the remains of expensive furniture rotting in the Nevada heat and cold. But what dominated the room, what drew our attention immediately, was the writing on the walls. Every surface was covered in words, scratched into plaster, carved into wooden panels, written in substances I didn't want to identify. The same message repeated thousands of times in different handwriting, different languages, different scripts. "We try to warn you." "Jesus Christ," David whispered. His flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing more and more writing. The words cover the floor, the ceiling, every single surface. How many people wrote this? Not people, I said, realizing the truth as I spoke it. The entities. All of them. They've been trying to communicate for decades, and we weren't listening. That's when we heard it. Chains rattling from somewhere deeper in the suite. The sound Elizabeth's presence made in room 109, but louder, more extensive, like dozens of chains being dragged across the floor. The sound came from what must have been the bedroom, beyond an open doorway to our left. We should have run. I know that now. But the hotel had us, had always had us. We walked toward that doorway like sleepwalkers, unable to resist the pull of whatever waited beyond. The bedroom was in better condition than the rest of the suite, as if it had been protected from time and decay by something unnatural. The furniture was intact. The wallpaper, though faded, was still attached to the walls. And chained to the massive bed frame in the center of the room were 7 figures. They weren't quite solid, not quite transparent. They flickered in and out of visibility, their forms wavering like reflections on water. I recognized Elizabeth immediately, the woman from room 109, her wrists wrapped in chains that connected her to the bed. The others I didn't know, but their appearance told stories of their own tragedies. A man with a wound in his chest that still bled shadow blood. A young woman whose neck bent at an impossible angle. A child, God help us, a child who couldn't have been more than 8, staring at us with eyes that held too much knowledge. They were all chained to the bed, and they were all looking at something behind us. David and I turned as one. The thing standing in the doorway wasn't human and never had been. It was tall, impossibly tall, having to stoop to fit under the doorframe. Its form was wrong, geometry that hurt to look at directly, angles that shouldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. Where its face should have been was darkness that seemed to pull the light from our flashlights, absorbing it, consuming it. The owner, Elizabeth's voice came from behind us, thin and strained. He didn't just die here. He became here. The hotel is his body now. Every room, every floor. And we're prisoners in his game. The thing in the doorway moved toward us, not walking but gliding, its form shifting and reforming with each moment. David grabbed my arm, pulling me back, but there was nowhere to go. We were trapped between the chained entities and the thing that had once been the hotel's owner. He feeds on fear, the man with the chest wound said. On suffering. That's why he keeps us here. That's why he draws new people in. The hotel isn't haunted. It's hunting. The thing reached for us with appendages that might have been arms, but looked more like shadows given substance. I felt its touch on my shoulder, ice cold and burning hot simultaneously, and something inside me broke. The fear that I've been managing for 3 years, keeping at bay through rationalization and false courage, came flooding back all at once. I screamed, and in my scream was every nightmare, every moment of dread, every time I'd felt watched and hunted and trapped. David was shouting something, pulling me toward the door, but the thing was faster. It moved between us and the exit, cutting off our escape. The chained entities were crying out now, their voices overlapping, creating a chorus of anguish that made my skull ache. Run, Elizabeth screamed. Different door. The window. Anything. Don't let him trap you here with us. I saw the window across the room, partially boarded but with gaps large enough to possibly squeeze through. David saw it too. We ran, the thing behind us making sounds that weren't quite sound, vibrations that felt like they were tearing the air apart. I reached the window first, David right behind me, and we tore at the board with our hands, splinters driving into our palms, nails ripping, wood finally giving way. The drop to the 3rd floor roof was maybe 8 feet. I went through the window without thinking, landing hard on the old shingles. David crashing down beside me a second later. Behind us, through the window, we could see the thing pressing against the opening, too large to fit through. its form rippling with rage. We scrambled across the roof to the fire escape, old and rusted but still intact. The climb down was a blur of terror and adrenaline. When we finally reached the ground, we ran to David's car and didn't stop driving until we reached the sheriff's office in Tonopah, 27 miles away. We told the sheriff everything. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. When we finished, he made a phone call, then turned back to us. "Robertson called me about an hour ago," he said. "Said you'd had an incident at the hotel, and I should expect you. He's on his way to meet us here." Robert arrived 30 minutes later. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, exhausted and defeated. "I should have told you," he said without preamble, "about the fourth floor, about what the hotel really is. But I needed staff, and no one would work there if they knew the truth." He explained that the hotel's owner, George Wingfield, had been involved in more than just running a business. He'd been obsessed with immortality, with leaving a legacy that would endure forever. When he realized the mining boom was ending and his empire was collapsing, he'd made a choice. Exactly what he did, Robert didn't know. But the result was clear. Wingfield had bound himself to the hotel, becoming part of its structure, its consciousness. And he'd trapped the people who'd suffered and died in the building with him, forcing them to relive their tragedies eternally, feeding on their anguish to sustain his cursed existence. The other entities, they're trying to break free, Robert said. That's why the activity has been escalating. They're fighting against him, trying to warn people away, trying to prevent more victims from being added to his collection. But he's stronger. The building itself is his body, and as long as it stands, he'll keep hunting. The sheriff had been taking notes throughout Robert's explanation. "So what you're telling me," he said slowly, "is that the Goldfield Hotel is literally a trap, a predator disguised as a building, and it's been luring people in for over a century." "Yes," Robert said simply. The sheriff closed his notebook. "Then we shut it down, condemn the building, keep everyone out." "It won't help," Robert said. "He's already marked the people who've worked there. You felt it, didn't you?" He looked at David and me. "The hotel in your dreams. The feeling of being watched, even when you're far away. He's claimed you. He'll keep reaching for you no matter where you go." He was right. Even now, sitting in my apartment 7 days later, I feel the hotel's presence. I hear footsteps in my hallway. I see shadows move in my peripheral vision. I dream of walking through endless corridors, rooms opening onto rooms, staircases that lead nowhere, and always that thing behind me, hunting, patient, knowing it is all the time in the world. The Goldfield Hotel is closed now, officially condemned due to structural concerns. Robert quit, unable to bear the guilt of what he'd helped facilitate. David is seeing therapists and barely sleeping. Carmen has moved to Arizona, trying to put distance between herself and the hotel. Thomas started carrying religious texts from multiple faiths, praying to every god that might listen for protection. And me? I'm writing this as a warning. If you've ever visited the Goldfield Hotel, if you've taken a tour or attended an event there, if you've spent any time within those walls, be vigilant. The entities try to warn us. They wrote it on every surface they could reach. We try to warn you. The hotel is more than haunted. It's alive. It's conscious. It's hungry. And it marks everyone who enters, claiming them slowly, waiting for the right moment to pull them back. The staff members who experience what I've described here, we're all marked now. We carry the hotel with us wherever we go. It's in our dreams, our waking thoughts, the shadows at the edge of our vision. I don't know if there's a way to break its hold. I don't know if the entities trapped there can ever be freed. I don't know what will happen when the building eventually collapses, whether Wingfield's consciousness will finally end, or if it will simply move to another location, another structure, another hunting ground. What I do know is this. Some places are evil not because of what happened there, but because of what they are. The Goldfield Hotel isn't haunted by ghosts. I asked the ghost, a malevolent consciousness wearing the shell of a building, feeding on fear and suffering, collecting souls like trophies. The entities trapped there, Elizabeth and the others, they try to save us. They broke the rules of their imprisonment to warn us away. They fought against their captor to protect us from suffering their fate. We didn't listen. We couldn't understand what they were trying to tell us until it was too late. So I'm saying it clearly now, for anyone who might hear. Stay away from the Goldfield Hotel. Don't visit, don't investigate, don't even drive past if you can avoid it. The building is patient. It has existed for over a century, and it will exist for a century more. It can wait. And if you give it the slightest opening, the smallest thread of connection, it will pull you in. I wake up at 9:47 p.m. every Tuesday now, no matter what time I go to bed. I hear footsteps outside my door. At 11:23 p.m., they start running. On Thursdays, my phone rings with no number displayed. I don't answer anymore, but I can hear voices on the voicemail, conversations from a century ago, and sometimes a voice asking for me specifically, asking when I'm coming back. Because that's what the hotel does. It doesn't just haunt you. It calls you home. It makes you feel like you belong there, like you've always belonged there, like the only way to find peace is to return and take your place among its permanent residents. I fight that call every day. So does David. So does everyone who truly encountered what lives on the fourth floor. We fight it knowing we might eventually lose, knowing that one night we might wake from a dream of endless corridors and find ourselves standing in the Goldfield's lobby, unable to remember driving there, unable to leave. The hotel staff try to warn people through their first-hand accounts. The entities try to warn us through their desperate communications. Now I'm trying to warn you. The Goldfield Hotel in Nevada isn't just haunted. It's a predator. It's alive, and it's always hungry for more. If you value your life, your sanity, your soul, stay away. Let it stand empty. Let it crumble. Let time reclaim it and bury whatever consciousness animates it. Because once you enter, once you let it mark you, you belong to the Goldfield Hotel forever. And forever is a very long time to spend in hell. The end.